English as a target. Yeah, yeah, because in the end we will budget according to what our contract value would be in the end. I think, is there any? I want, because you mentioned it already that you have concerns about it, so I don't think it makes a point. The final bit about it is this training issue. I mean, we're talking about from we've already here. We've got the whole thing, and hundreds of people will be trained, and there will be college. I don't know, whatever, something from the government sponsoring, and all that kind of thing, etc. The vast majority of what they need there is very basic good practice. They don't need very much more than that. You know, everybody around. It sounds to me almost like finding excuses to pass it further, or the computer system is not there yet. For 3 years now, we're waiting for these bloody computer systems to start taking out. Well, let's go back to the, if it is until we do that, to the very basic thing, which to a certain extent you hinted you're doing. I mean, in the old days, you had for every contract a file, had all the information there, and the manager or the project officer had to make sure that by Friday, every document you had related to anything is on that file. Doesn't matter. You know, what else? But you have the information. How can you go 3 months without having that? You know, without having the information anyway. That's not an issue of training. That is an issue of a culture, etc. So anyway, that's
Okay.
my say. But I think, you know, I'm really pleased with the progress, and I can see it. Darren, honestly, you know, thank you. Yeah, all right. But yeah, about it. But yeah, yeah. But it took us years to get here. So I see the progress. Let's continue.
Just well, okay, Councillor, come in.
It was talking about waivers, so I was just wondering if waivers are also published in that site that you just mentioned. Thanks.
So it depends upon the type of waiver, which is, you know, it sort of leads into that's why the officers needed training and quite in-depth training in terms of procurement acts, because it is quite complex. So in terms of the waivers, you've got, let's say somebody does a direct award and it's above a certain amount, then you have an obligation to publish that on the finder tender service. They also have an obligation to publish variations to contracts or extensions to contracts when they go beyond a certain threshold. But it's quite complex because that threshold fluctuates depending upon the type of services, the nature of the variation and things like that. So not all of them go, well, but actually very few will probably be published on there because most of them will fall within the required parameters laid out in the regulations or within our CSOs. So whilst there may appear to be a lot of waivers, actually that has dramatically reduced from where it was previously within the organisation last year. So since strategic procurement have kind of taken more control above procurements over 25,000, there's been much more engagement with the services around ensuring that there is compliance and there is less waivers within that. So, you know, what we might find here within the waivers is actually a service has completely forgotten about extending a contract, and therefore the services have already, or there's been spend incurred within that, and we have to find a way that ensures that we can keep them in a compliant framework as well, and that may well involve a waiver.
Irene, yeah, please.
So, councillors, a couple of questions. There are actually some of the areas that I think I've kind of heard you pick out was it's not just about waivers, it's around variations. We do monitor that, don't we, within the commissioning board? We also monitor things like spend with single suppliers, but multiple small contracts as well. So I think Yeah, so I think quite a lot of the areas it's, you know, kind of, we didn't pick out all of the data, but there is an awful lot of that compliance data that we are looking at. It is probably, you know, in all of that, you want the exceptions, don't you, rather than the norm. And I think, as Barry's mentioned, that in the example, the waivers, that has improved significantly. We are really targeting that through the commissioning board, which has a representative from every directorate, and the role of that individual is, if we highlight a concern, and we are building on this, so nothing's in a perfect position yet. We are building on that, where that representative for the directorate, if we've discussed at the commission board that we're concerned about this particular area, actually it's their responsibility then to take that back into the directorate to explore, or will be to explore that in more detail, and then come back with an update. And so slowly you start to see that shift in culture, but it's kind of managed at quite a senior level around the commissioning board table. So, you know, we have still got a long way to go, but I feel as though we have that. Let's hope Barry and I sat here in a 12 months time and we're showing you, you know, very different compliance data whereby these are the exception rather than the norm. But I feel like we've got the right level of internal governance and oversight now, and that there are consequences of non-compliance. So rather than just saying we've got high numbers of waivers, actually we are really tackling and taking the action to try and improve that. So I think that kind of comes back to, we probably do need some more defined measures of success, actually, but it's been a bit of a whirlwind, hasn't it, over the last kind of 6 to 9 months. It feels now it's now starting to bed down. So hopefully that, you know, and you know, thanks to Barry and other colleagues, actually, you know, something like the commissioning modernisation programme has to be a whole organisational approach to it, because the commissioners are out in service, the contract managers are out in service. There is a limit to how much strategic procurement can have oversight on. No, I think we're in space now where we're trying to bring in some really tight controls and tight compliance to try and embed that culture of kind of good contract management and good kind of procurement. Who's to say in kind of 3 to 4 years' time that actually, once we've got that in place, the organisation, then we can start to release some of those compliance controls, but we're just not quite there at the moment.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to come back to the comment about Councillor Daggins about training. So I think training is really important. I think training will help the organisation to apply good practices in place to produce better quality of outcomes. If the staff knowledge is not trained in a way that also produces, let's say, inadequate data. So training is really, really important, I think, and that also builds a good culture, good practice. So I suggest, you know, training should be at the core for this procurement overarching approach. So I'll just move on to the next question, which was from Rennie.
Thank you. This is all very insightful and really helpful. So thank you very much for your efforts on there. I just wanted to clarify, to what extent could you sort of map this data that shows sort of risk and value? So where are the high risk contracts to really focus kind of efforts and target it? And I guess specifically linked to the chart that you show on 9.3.3, where there's this sort of outlier, which is the contract awarded to John Siskin's son for the Civic Centre refurbishment. And I just wonder, I can't recall for the time that I've been here that anyone's come and spoken or provided the Audit and Risk Committee any sort of insight or assurance as to how that contract's being managed. So where there is high risk and high value, it feels as though there should be an obligation around that service or that sort of contract owner to come and provide that level of insight to ensure that we're keeping within the parameters that have been defined as part of the contractual obligation. Otherwise, we find ourselves in the kind of contract variation state and that sort of perpetual cycle. So I just wondered, to what extent could we implement or embed that level of visibility? Thank you.
Okay, so just in terms of that, so recently we've introduced a new contract management toolkit, And what that contract management toolkit does is actually you assign a risk profile to each contract. So whether that's like a high, medium or low level, generally we call them gold, silver, bronze, or you might have a platinum type one. So it's there to follow what central government outline in terms of best practice, and the training that's associated with that is free and available through that. And that's something that we're picking up as part of the commissioning modernisation programme. So that will be rolled out much more. We've started to do it with some colleagues, but there'll be a broader programme. And the reason it's not gone into a full sort of rollout at the moment is because our colleague who's leading on that particular work stream wants to just kind of take a step back, review that, make sure it's aligned with all the other policies and processes that they want to put in place. In terms of seeing how that's how the risk is managed, so particularly with capital programs, they've got a fairly robust governance process within there, but ultimately it's within the services to ensure that they are properly contract managing those, making sure that the risks are being managed properly. You will see more of that in the construction side of things, perhaps than some of the other softer services that we've got around the council. But certainly in terms of a lot of the key contracts and the big contracts do seem to have a more robust contract management process that's wrapped around them and that. So ultimately it sits within the service, but if we had the technology in place, it would enable us. So you know, as part of the ERP program, what we're trying to do is have the technology in place that enables us to monitor that corporately as well, so that the KPIs from the contracts can be monitored and then brought to commissioning board or other governance bodies to highlight where there are risks or where we see sort of issues around that. So it is part of that journey, unfortunately, and we're not quite at the end of it yet.
No, of course, and completely understand that. Yes, sort of sharing some insights as to where the vision might get us to, and I appreciate that the larger CapEx programs will have robust contract management practices in place, but that doesn't necessarily mitigate all of the risks from my experience and what I've seen. I think you can have things like payment by results and all of these sort of good practices embedded into the contract. Notwithstanding all of that, you still find yourself overrunning because contractor X falls over because of their sort of shaky financial credentials or otherwise. So it's just trying to kind of kick the tires and make sure that we're in a robust position.
Yeah, so and just to add to that in terms of the financial standing of the suppliers, so we do monitor the financial standing so that of suppliers. It depends upon some of the services or the works that we're doing, but we have some contractors that we deem to be medium or high risk, not just contractors but also contracts themselves, and they are monitored monthly through Experian. So we get alerts if there is a change in their profile. You know, we hear lots of rumours that come within the industries and the various sectors as to some of the suppliers that might be in trouble. So, you know, the reports that we get are always going to be behind. They're never going to be 100% up to date. But we also have in place policies and procedures whereby if we feel that a contract is high risk, then there should be relevant surety in place to try and protect the organisation against failure and that. But, you know, inevitably it happens. We've had a few kind of, you know, sort of high profile ones recently, but actually, you know, through some of the challenging times, particularly around COVID and thereafter, we fared very well. We had minimal, probably only 2 or 3 contractors go under in that time. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's 10:15. Is there any burning questions? I think some officers will need to go and catch their train. Okay, so if there's no any burning questions, I will now read the recommendation for this item, which is to note the discussion, the information contained in the report. Thank you so much. Thank you, officers. Thank you, members.